Hello, my name is Tier Welling, and I want to talk to you today about a very intense topic. Massively intense topic. Okay. I'm working on rebuilding the counts that I've been doing for the last bit of time, doing 8 videos a day about. Okay. I'm working on redoing them because the course of the last week I've learned that I need to present the information slightly differently. I need to take it out of Word format and put it into Excel format so that I can have longer counts and wider information and more succinct information. I'm also going to add the Hebrew to it also. Okay, so Hebrew, the language of Hebrew is the direct child of the Elder Futhark, and statistically I can prove that. Okay. So as I worked through this situation, several facts are coming to my mind. The first fact is the fact that the Holocaust was in part designed to destroy the information I'm about to share with you. The second information that is most important is that this is not the first time the Jews have been destroyed to hide this information. And the information is that Hebrew's parent is the Elder Futhark. Why that's critically important is because the first temple built by King Solomon, the grandson of King David, who took on Goliath, who was a very tall, big, massive hero, and he used slightly inappropriate combat, because in true one-on-one combat, you're supposed to not use range weapons. You're supposed to use hand-to-hand weapons. But he used a range weapon, and he used a sling from 50, 100 feet, 200 feet away. Anyways, and so the biggest hero against that was fighting against the Jewish army at that time was Goliath, who was big, tall, and huge, and was undefeated in battle and all kinds of other stuff. Within that structure, when David killed Goliath, dispatched Goliath, and Goliath fell, and other things occurred, King David then established an army for the Jews, so they wouldn't be messed with anymore, because there was the army that Goliath was hired by wanted to continue with their battle against the Jews. So instead of having the Jewish culture's lights turn out, they created a homeland in the ghetto that they were signed by Moses, because Moses was not a Jew. He was an Avaris, which means that he was a Hyksos, which means that he was, and that's the culture that comes from Esau, the brother of Jacob, who there's no quark of Esau's system that did not hate his brother Jacob, the father of the Jews. As so this Gables, Salem, Massachusetts, Jerusalem, Salem, this time frame situation evolved, takes on a very, very weird situation, because the House of the Seven Gables is about there's actually 8 gables, but one of them is lower than the rest of them. The 7 of them are on the same XY plane. The 8th one is several feet below, and that's the gable that is over is part of the roof that extends over the side door as you enter the Gables from the street. The shop is to the right, is to the left, and the servant's slave kitchen is to the right. You go through the door in front of you, and immediately to the right is the master staircase. To the left, immediately to the left, about 10, 15 feet away, is a doorway that extends to, there was a porch there. There's still a porch there now, but there was a well-constructed porch there. And after that 15, 20 feet of porch, there was a infrastructure of a very rough-hewn building there, which is where the hermit slash druid, Druid, although it's pronounced Druge, which is very, very similar etymologically to Jew. Rouge and Jew is very similar. And he lived there this was a standard custom in the 15, 16, 1700s for the uber rich to have a thinker, a figure that dispensed wisdom and philosophy and such, and that their job was to spend 6 months of the summer out in the garden thinking, being a thinking person, doing the contemplation thing. And then in the 6 months of winter, when it's too cold outside because they'll freeze to death, they go up and live in the attic. And there's in the South of Seven Gables, there's an attic that's completely furnished, but it has its own staircase next to the primary staircase of the family staircase. So you have a staircase, a primary staircase that is for everybody's use, and then you have a private staircase just for that room. On the opposite side of the house from that's the hermit, Jew, Druge, Hercules winter quarters is on the opposite side of that main stretch of the house from the side of the house that stretches the street that faces the backyard. And the backyard house, the backyard part, is an unfinished room that is over the second largest room in the house on the second floor, and that was a meeting and planning room. Actually, it was used for multiple things. There were multiple configurations, and there's sometimes that room was divided into three, and sometimes it was just one big, huge, grand room, and sometimes it was divided into two. So there's also a fireplace in there that's semi out of place. So anyway, the point is that the configuration of that unfinished room and the second biggest room on the second floor, and then below that would be a parlor for various assorted activities that you would do in a parlor slash dining room slash small dining room, a smaller, more intimate family and close friends dining room, as opposed to the ballroom that was upstairs, which was ballrooms and dining rooms always doubled for each other. The servants would convert it to a several dozen chair dining room, and then they would take it all out to put a band on one side, and then people would dance and congregate on the other side. So we're talking about the other side. We're talking about the side of the house that is specific to the function and structure of the unfinished side. The mathematics of that unfinished side are the parlor is a double for a very specific temple in the Roman Forum. Above that would be a temple on top of the Capitoline Hill, and above that, now this is where the math gets a little bit weird and the time frames get a little bit weird and such, but it applies strongly to Jera, because the word Jera is both Hebrew, it's Jerusalem, as well as the 12th character and the Elder Futhark sequence, and that 12th character in the Elder Futhark sequence literally. In the Futhark, it literally means that it describes the concept of time. So you have a time element here. So you have a sacred space, a sacred space of time, Jerusalem, which is the capital of the Jews is Jerusalem, which means that the problem is that word Jerusalem has two etymologies. One is Egyptian Salem, and two, it has its other etymology is the Elder Futhark, which means time. So it's a sacred city of time. When the Puritans were creating, building, and orienting themselves to building their new utopia in the colonies, because they're tired of being picked on by the Anglicans and the Catholics that were still operating in Britain, they decided to move for religious freedom. Well, their religious freedom was to be nasty and mean and cruel and sadistic to the other religions that also wanted religious freedom from the Anglicans and the Roman Catholics that were operating in the UK. So they and the mass murder death toll in such that occurred under Puritan hands in the late 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, up to into the 1800s, and most of the 1900s, is still quite apparent, quite around. The evidence is shockingly available. So there's a time frame involved with the situation because, one, Jerusalem, it means sacred city of time. But there's also another aspect of that, because the main temple of Jerusalem, the Temple of Solomon, which was rebuilt to the Temple of Zerubbabel, it was then taken apart. That temple was dismantled by Emperor Claudius, and that temple was dismantled by Emperor Claudius. Well, he started the destruction of it. Nero continued it, sort of, and then Vespasian took those pieces and built two things out of it. One, he took some of the pieces and built the Colosseum, gladiator fights, and for a large majority of the time that the Colosseum was up, the gladiators were Jews. At least the first century or so, the gladiators were like half of them were Jews. There was also political prisoners and prisoners captured in war and that kind of stuff, Spartacus and the like. Although Spartacus was there's a century between the time of Spartacus and the construction of the Colosseum. There's a century between the two. So you have the Colosseum was built out of the material from the Temple of Solomon, the Temple of Zerubbabel. But the rest of the materials were used to create the Vatican. And so that literally makes the Vatican, part of the materials were from the Temple of Solomon, Temple of Zerubbabel in Levant lands, but the other materials were from the city of Heliopolis in Egypt. Now, Heliopolis is a very fascinating etymological situation, because you have Helios, which means sun. The 12th character in the Futhark sequence means sun, time, and Opolis means sacred city. Now, village. Now, in German, the villa, village, Italian, German, villa, village. It means just a settlement, just a town. Opolis is specific to Greek, meaning sacred city. There's a difference between Vil and Opolis, and this is and Opolis specifically would be translated as Salem. So literally, Heliopolis translates to city of the sun, sacred city of the sun. Helios, sacred of the sun. Opolis, sacred city. So you have sacred city of the sun. So Heliopolis literally translates to Jerusalem. Now, when the Juliac family had the city of Heliopolis dismantled, moved to Rome, and reassembled, they reassembled it on the garden of the Vatican, which then Nero dismantled it and make himself a circus, and then that was dismantled to make the Vatican, and then that was dismantled to rebuild the Vatican, but they needed more parts. They didn't have enough building material, so they took building materials from the main areas of the Palatine Hill and the Roman Forum. So in Jerusalem, it was moved from Levant lands to Rome, and then the Puritans conquered the city of whatever the city was called beforehand, and then renamed the towns of Salem's village and Salem, the sacred Salem, which is kept the name Salem, and Salem Sound, and the Salem town, which was located just northeast. It changed its name to, I think, Denbury. Um, so I think that's what it's called. It's just northeast of Salem. It changed its name shortly after the witch trials, and does its best to reject the Salem information, despite the fact that several of the Salem victims lived in that town, as well as several of the accusers lived in that town. So there's a one town wants to embrace its witch heritage and the trials of 1692, and the other town goes, that didn't happen. Let's ignore it. Let's move on. Let's move on. So in Salem, in Salem, Massachusetts, at the property of the House of Seven Gables, mathematically you have that structure would be, okay, that unfinished room above, the small room in the middle, and then the parlor below that, mathematically is a wizard's tower. But it wasn't a wizard's tower because the Puritans didn't like that stuff, and that they sought to do all kinds of really nasty and disgusting things with anybody who wasn't a born again evangelical nut job. They ignore so many facts and evidence and details that there's a solid percentage of the born again nut job evangelicals who still think the Earth is flat. So you can't get more. It's hard to get more nut job than that without needing medication, without being a harm to yourself and others. So you have that. Okay, so if this unfinished Rome is mathematically designed to be they pulled the Vatican, the dome, the dome over St. Peter's to the Capitoline, to the top of the Capitoline Hill, and put it over, and then you had the St. Peter's Basilica in the sanctum area between the two temples, and then below that you had the on an odd angle. Of course, things are relative when you're talking about C, and the whole functionality and structure of the measurements and concepts of time, Jera, and Jerusalem, and the elder Fudark, and the things get a little bit microgravities and become a little bit worried, and this is kind of the same thing depending on the relativity of perspective. So you have an angle, and then it evens out. So therefore, the House of Seven Gables could easily be mathematically defined as the new temple, a rebuilt temple of the temple of the Jews, a primary temple. For lack of a better description, the Temple of El Bethel, a copy of the temple that King Solomon built, the copy of which was copied by Zerubbabel, and he rebuilt the copy, but he built a dome over it to hide the major details. And I say a copy because the Temple of Solomon was a copy of the Temple of Tyre. The Temple of Tyre was a copy of an ancient temple in Egypt. That was most likely originally it was the temple of Ptah, and the Ptah and the Aten Ptah is the human of the Ptah of the Aten being God or some divine being as such, which is built into the pyramids, which is a huge deal for Egyptology and all of Rome, because all of Rome used the Aten and the Janus concept, as every aspect of that culture revolved around those things. So you have, so in Salem, Massachusetts, you literally have mathematically a reconstruction of the temple of Ptah that was copied into the temple of Tyre, which was copied to be the temple of Solomon, which was recopied and rebuilt into the temple of Zerubbabel, which was then recopied and rebuilt. And the materials of at least three of these buildings were used to build the Colosseum and St. Peter's Basilica, which makes things very, very interesting. You have the mathematics that were then copied into Salem, Massachusetts, on the property of the Gables. So now we get to some very funky stuff. The funky stuff we get to is the following. In 1661, the property was attacked by Puritans who were the army and the culture and a slightly different radical bent of evangelical Puritan hardcoreness. There was a influx of thousands of troops from the city of New Amsterdam. When New Amsterdam fell to Captain Henry Ogle, or John Ogle, they were forced to evacuate, and there's thousands of troops, Dutch. And the Dutch were way into the slave trade, huge into the slave trade. So the Dutch moved to Salem, which is only about 200 miles away, because Boston was not an acceptable place, because Boston was already engaged in full scale fighting, and all the players involved were truly entrenched, and there was no place for the Dutch to make their way into, because the Dutch from New Amsterdam did not have the same ideas and philosophy of the English who established, who were fighting for their rightful place and position in Boston. So there was no hierarchical structure to go into that wasn't already taken up by people that were already there. So they had to go to Salem, because there was openings for the Dutch to go to Salem, and that's 1661. And it didn't take them long to figure out that this building that existed before 1660 had been built decades, if not centuries, beforehand. This building was a building that was rather intensely oriented toward the functionality and structure of building the Ivies. It was the capital of the Ivies, and it was obliterated. That capital thing was obliterated between 1630, 1640, but it was erased from existence. That first Ivy League school was erased from existence in 1661, and a new that they did a bunch of nasty, really, really horrible stuff to rebuild the ground. They took the pillars that were there, and they filled pillars in with the stuff, and then took a couple of years for the ground to become ground, and then they built the House of Seven Gables on top of that. That whole story has been talked out multiple times in multiple different stories by the invention, partially due to the writings of, and the fact that his family owned the property and had owned it for 100 years or so. Nathaniel Hawthorne didn't create Gothic horror, but he was a primary raw author of Gothic horror, and he encouraged Poe, although Edgar Allan Poe was born basically within a couple of years of each other. Nathaniel Hawthorne and Poe were contemporaries of each other. They were I'm not trying to remember which one was born within a couple of years, first or second. But also Herman Melville in Moby Dick was also heavily inspired by visits with Nathaniel Hawthorne on the property. And Oscar Wilde took inspiration from the House of Seven Gables book from Nathaniel Hawthorne, and wrote the Portrait of Dorian Gray, and massive amount of stories about the 1660 time period inspired H.P. Lovecraft, and his stories were weird psychological funky trips to say the absolute least. And a lot of his stories were inspired by the 1660 events, which were nasty to say on a good day, and crimes against humanity on the rest of the time. So you have it used to be the previous to 1661 building used to be some kind of a copy of King Solomon's Temple, and it was built that way in order to be able to have the proper architecture, and that also means that it was also a structure built to house the Ark of the Covenant, which brings up some way interesting ideas regarding, what if the Ark of the Covenant actually sat somewhere on that third floor, and since the Ark of the Covenant had disappeared way beforehand, and the people who built that were Templars from England, from the UK. Of course, it's only some. Technically speaking, England is just the area around London. The Kingdom Mercia is England, and there's a war that happened between the 1400s and the 1600s that kind of erased the boundaries, and England became the whole area. But it's actually called Britain because Britain is the ancient name that was named after Prince Bruto of Troy, and he's the offspring of Aeneas and his wife, who was very, very likely Queen Dido, because she didn't commit suicide, she didn't die. That's Roman propaganda. Queen Dido actually went with him to Rome, and they had a happy life. They had children, and Prince Bruto was one of them, or he was a grandson, and he founded the British people from that. So you have a whole section of information that's all kinds of interesting. And you have the creation of creation of King Solomon's Temple of Tyre, Temple of Ptah, in Salem, Massachusetts, but the Puritans couldn't handle it because the reason why that building was built that way, as a reflection of King Solomon's Temple, is because, and a storehouse for the Ark of the Covenant, is because they were working to the original designers in the 1500s were working to rebuild a better version, a better understood, a better edited, better version of the Bible. And when the results were handed to King James in the late 1500s, early 1600s, he said, "Oh, cool, thank you so much. So I want to have my authors. I'm going to change this section, this section, this section, this section, this section, to reflect as a political maneuver to appease my enemies, the Prussians. And I'm gonna add more of their information to it, and change the story from being pro Jacob to being pro Esau, ECU, instead of being pro Jesus, and Simon Peter being pro Paul." So we're going to make those changes, and I'm going to rename it for myself too. I'm going to rename it the King James Bible, and that's where it came from. Now, the rage over that was not subtle in the British Empire, which was the colonies. Thank you. That name is courtesy of John Dee, who was a famous, extremely famous mystic, spiritual person, for lack of a better description, a magician, a wizard, and he did those actions to, and he was semi in charge of that building, of the building that existed before the A building. The A building, the B building is on the same exact floor plan, exact the same area. The A building was in somehow, shape, or form destroyed, and the B building, the House of the Seven Gables, was built in its place. Well, because you've got Ark of the Covenant things, and you've got the Elder Futhark situation, and you've got Jerusalem and that kind of stuff all going on, it's possible that there's aspects of this that are just out of phase with our megahertz range. Our physical reality exists within a range of megahertz. Well, what if the original building, through various sort of divine interventions in the Ark of the Covenant and various John Dee's work and other people's work, maybe what if when it was attacked in 1661, what if this building was just shifted out of phase, and this building was built in its place, but this building is still anchored to that same location. What if the staircase and that the Wizard's Tower are still anchors for the original A building, and that original A building has mathematical connections to the Temple of the Vatican, Zerubbabel, King Solomon's Temple, the Temple of Tyr, the Temple of Ptah.